and ask everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Timniak, if you lead us, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. First up is item number 3, which is the minutes from June 17th and June 19th, a special meeting and then the regular meeting. Okay to take these together? Would you like to take them one at a time?
Together.
Okay, may I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion or edits?
I have nothing.
Good. All right, seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. Item 4, recognition of Fairfield Emergency Dispatcher Jennifer DeJoseph, Connecticut EMS Council President George C. Ganag, Volunteer of the Year. Is Jennifer here? Jennifer, you come on up. Please take a place at the podium there, if you'd stand behind that. We do have a proclamation here for you, but I thought you might tell us a little bit about your job and this recognition and what it means, and obviously congratulations from not only the board, but the entire town on getting this.
Thank you. I volunteer in Trumbull for Trumbull EMS. It's where I live in Trumbull, so I'm really lucky to be able to volunteer in a community that I live in. But I also work in Fairfield at the Emergency Communications Center, and again, lucky because I grew up in Fairfield, so I'm able to kind of represent both communities. So the award was a big surprise to me. I didn't know I was getting it. I actually thought it was a scam when I received the email, so I had to ask the chief. But I'm lucky I have 2 jobs that are really in a field that I can help people. They can be pretty stressful at times, but I'm lucky to have the support of my husband and my family, and they understand my crazy schedule even when I don't. So I'm very thankful.
Well, fantastic. Any comments from the board?
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. It's not often we get to see the people that work in the basement, so it's nice you got the award.
It's nice to be out.
No, I think that, too often our 911 operators are out of sight, and it's not until you make that call that you
Exactly.
appreciate them being there. And I think too many of us have had that opportunity. I have personally, and I appreciate the professionalism and the calmness, because generally when you make that call, you're not calm.
Yeah.
So you guys do a tremendous job, and certainly we owe you our thanks throughout all of this. You were fairly quick in going through that. I think there's more to you than that. So I'm going to, with the permission of the board, I'm going to read the proclamation so we all see and hear this. From the town of Fairfield, proudly honors Jennifer DeJoseph, emergency dispatcher in the Fairfield Emergency Communications Center, for winning the Connecticut EMS Council of Presidents George A. Ganag, am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Volunteer of the Year Award. This award is named after George A. Ganag, who is an exceptional 23-year volunteer firefighter and 10-year EMT who was killed in 1987 at the age of 62 while responding to a motor vehicle accident on the highway. Mr. Ganag, who had proudly served his country in the United States Navy, was instrumental in the formation of New Hartford's first responder program. And whereas Jennifer received this distinguished award in recognition of her tremendous dedication to serving others in her own community of Trumbull, where she has volunteered since 2008 as an emergency medical technician, and whereas Jennifer came to work in the town of Fairfield as an emergency communications dispatcher in May of 2011, hey, we started about the same time.
Oh.
All right. She has had an exemplary career in Fairfield, having been cited many times for her significant role in handling police, medical, and fire emergencies. And whereas time and again, Jennifer has enthusiastically stepped up to the plate within the ECC family on many fronts, including heading up the dispatcher peer-to-peer support program and the Employee Health and Safety Committee. She also serves as the employee representative to the ECC Relocation Project and is a certified training officer for the new dispatchers. And whereas Jennifer recently attained her certification by the American Heart Association as a CPR instructor.
Did?
I used to be a PR instructor.
Did you?
Thank you for doing that. She will soon be responsible for certifying her ECC coworkers in CPR, which is a state of Connecticut requirement for all emergency dispatchers. Now, therefore, I, Michael C. Tetro, first selectman of the town of Fairfield, do hereby proclaim Wednesday, July 10th, 2019, as Jennifer DeJoseph Day throughout the town of Fairfield. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, next up, item number 5, appointments. To hear, consider, and act upon the following appointments. To the Solid Waste and Recycling Commission, this requires RTM approval. Guy Gleestein, unaffiliated, from 165 Stonewall Lane for a term of 11/18 to 11/22. And this is to fill a vacancy for someone whose term expired. May I have a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion.
A second.
Second.
Any comments from the board?
I would say I support Guy. I don't know, are you here to ask you? Guy gave me a call right before 4th of July weekend. I was unable to call you back prior to, I guess, you going away and, getting back to the work week. I did look at your resume, and I got a couple other calls in support of you, so I'm enthusiastically supporting you for the WPCA, or the Water Pollution Control Commission. Thank you.
Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, no, Guy reached out to me also shortly before I left on vacation. I did have a chance to look at his stuff. Him also, too. I received a couple of emails about it, and happy to appoint you. Good luck.
Good. And I had an excellent conversation. I've known Guy for a number of years now, and I appreciate his volunteering and stepping up to the Solid Waste and Recycling Commission. It may not sound like the most important commission in town in some respects, but I would point out to everybody that recycling has been a tremendous issue recently. The whole market has been totally restructured as part of this global conflict with China, that we used to, just literally one short year ago, we were receiving $25 a ton to recycle revenue. It's now, starting July 1st, costing us $75 a ton, plus another $40 in distribution cost, over $100 a ton as a cost to recycle. It now actually costs us more to recycle than it does to throw things away, which is an amazing turnaround in such a short period of time, something we as a town are still wrestling with, something other towns are still wrestling with. I just read a report in one of the Hartford papers about the towns up there going through the same process. We're being asked to recycle things that now there is no market to recycle for. So it creates we hope things in the next year or two turn around, but it is a very different world that happened very fast. And by law in the state of Connecticut, we're required to recycle and required to recycle specific items, whether there's a market for them or not. Almost 40% of our recycling is tonnage is glass, which makes sense because it's one of the heavier things you throw away. What I learned recently is that almost 50% of the recycling we send to our recycling center up in Shelton is then transported to a waste facility to be considered with other solid waste. So we're paying for it to get up to Shelton, then we're paying for it to get thrown in, actually in a burn facility, so it is getting burned with the rest of our solid waste. But we are, in essence, double transporting it and double booking it, and these are things that by law we're required to do, as strange as that sounds. So Guy, there's plenty of work there, and I know we talked about your work on this on the national front, and I really appreciate your perspective, your background, and thank you for bringing that to the town at this point. Thanks. Any further comments from the board? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Congratulations, and thank you.
Good luck.
Again, you can follow up with Kathleen Griffin, my office. You will still need to get sworn in officially after you still need to be approved by the RTM so she can help coordinate with the timing for that. Next up, to hear, consider, and act upon the following appointment to the Sustainable Fairfield Task Force. Ms. Hussein, a Democrat from 579 Judd Street, and this is to fill a new seat that was added when the charge was revised. May I have a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion.
A second?
Second.
Any comments from the board?
No, it looks like she's here. Thank you for your willingness to serve. I look forward to hearing about your contributions to the commission.
Thank you.
Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, no, I had a chance to look over everything last night when I got home, and I like her qualifications, and I like the fact that she's already been participating to a degree in the task force, so I'm happy that she's going to continue that service in a seat, so good luck with it.
Thank you.
And if I can add in, we had a great conversation on the phone. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk on that. Love your background, but also your enthusiasm and perspective on doing this. And as Mr. Payton pointed out, that you're already kind of involved in this and you're doing these things. So thank you for being part of this and be willing to serve our town in this regard, because again, another very important piece that kind of goes hand in hand with the recycling we talked about earlier, but touches on so many different aspects of our town government, but also life in our town. So we're very proud of the fact that we received that silver award from the Connecticut Sustainability Group, and that we had the highest score of any town in the state in doing that. So thank you for helping us continue our leadership in this regard. Any further comments from the board?
No.
Any comments from the public? All right, seeing none, back to the board. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, congratulations, and thank you.
Thank you so much for your consideration. I appreciate it.
All right, next up, to hear a report on the Fairfield Housing Authority and its future plans, is somebody here from the Housing Authority to help address this?
Yes, Mr. Selectman. For the record, Brian LeClaire.
Yeah.
I am counsel for the Fairfield Housing Authority, and I'm here with Carol Martin, our executive director.
And Attorney LeClaire, if I could, since I was talking with Ms. Martin when we asked for this agenda item, just to be clear, this is not about the project per se on High Street, that certainly you're meeting with the, some of those questions may come up,
Right.
but the goal of this is to understand what the Housing Authority is doing, what its objectives, how the Housing Corporation work, who runs that, and because a lot of these things came up without a review before this board.
And that is our purpose of being here, and that is our understanding.
Very good.
Thank you. And again, it's Brian LeClaire. I'm a partner with the law firm of Birch & Moses with offices in Westport and Milford, and I'm counsel for the Fairfield Housing Corporation. And as you know, the Fairfield Housing Corporation is the applicant for property located on High Street that is subject to a Conservation Commission, acting as the Inland Wetlands Agency, meeting later this evening. And thank you for this opportunity to come before you. Again, the Fairfield Housing Corporation is a tax-exempt corporation set up pursuant to Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code of the United States. It's a tax-exempt corporation. It has a board of directors, all of whom serve without compensation, and it has a sole member. Its sole member of the corporation is the Fairfield Housing Authority. The Fairfield Housing Authority is a body corporate and a body politic. It's created pursuant to the Connecticut General Statutes, and as such, it is the housing authority for the town of Fairfield, Connecticut. And I refer you to Section 8-40 of the Connecticut General Statutes. The housing authority of the town of Fairfield receives its funding from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, commonly known as HUD, as well as from rental revenues from the residents living at its various properties. As you know, the Fairfield Housing Authority provides services to the residents of our town. The Fairfield Housing Authority was created back in 1964 by this body, by the Board of Selectmen, and it has commissioners. The commissioners are appointed by the first selectman of the town of Fairfield, and they all serve without compensation of any type. The Housing Authority currently owns several properties, either through the Housing Corporation, the Trefoil Apartments, which are 30 affordable rental units, and the Pine Tree Apartments, 50 units. It administers 70 to 75 rental assistant vouchers for the town of Fairfield. Those are what we commonly refer to as Section 8 vouchers. And the mission of the Fairfield Housing Authority is as set forth in the Connecticut General Statutes. And it includes addressing the needs for affordable housing through the acquisition and development of land for affordable housing. It also is charged with promoting the creation and preservation of housing for low and moderate income persons and families. Right now, we have a waiting list of over 100 people, and it would be higher if the list actually remained open, but it can't because of the incredible interest in the few properties available, the apartments and properties available by the Housing Authority. Right now, the wait time is 7 to 10 years for an apartment in a Housing Authority property in Fairfield.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Are the wait list of 100, are those Fairfield residents, or can you be a resident of another town and apply to be on the Fairfield housing?
Yeah, Ms. Martin could address that. I'll
Okay.
address that in a second,
Okay.
specifically. In December 2018, last December, the Fairfield Housing Corporation acquired 980 High Street for $2.1 million. There was considerable interest, as you can imagine, from private developers at that time, which I'm sure, based upon experience, have proposed already a 830G development, which is allowed by the statutes with a very small percentage of affordable units, as is also allowed by 830G. Fairfield Housing Corporation was the successful purchaser of the property, and it bought the property to construct a housing development pursuant to its mission. Most specifically, there's a proposal now for 40 residential units, a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 1-bedroom, 80% of which are going to be affordable under the state guidelines. It's going to be similar to the very successful and recently approved and redeveloped project at Pine Tree that you're all familiar with. That's 40 total units. These units in Pine Tree, as well as the units that are proposed in High Street, will remain affordable in perpetuity. It's not a short-term proposal. This property will be maintained by the Housing Corporation, which member is the Housing Authority, and it will remain always a Housing Authority property. It's not going to be flipped or sold to a private developer. And we've had a great interest in these units as well at High Street before they've even been approved, and that's why the list has been closed. People call on a daily basis looking to get on the list and trying to get an apartment on these units on High Street. There are seniors, our disabled, our families that have been broken by death and divorce, people who want to stay in Fairfield. They're the entry-level workers in Fairfield, the secretaries, the public works employees who qualify for affordable housing under the state statutes, given the income levels in Fairfield. In fact, this project could have been built, and many more of these projects could be built in Fairfield and would be very successful given the need. You're familiar with the town's affordable housing plan. As you remember, it was commissioned by you back in 2013. And at that time, this board noted a few years ago that, quote, there is an ongoing need for affordable housing in Fairfield. And you also noted in that report and plan that the town needs to work proactively to meet the needs of its residents with respect to affordable housing. And your body adopted that back in 2004 with that mission. Following much thought as well as public input by our community, that was not a fast vote and a simple plan. That was a complex plan that was thoroughly vetted. You noted at that time as a board that, in your letter to the residents, that over the past 25 years, needs for affordable housing in Fairfield has increased, and that the demand for affordable housing in Fairfield has become much more significant. And I'll outline a few portions of that report. It recognizes a need in our community which is not but must be satisfied, that proactive efforts need to be taken by the authority, that a public-private partnership is one solution, that our town needs choices for older residents so that they can remain in our community, as well as for younger people and single families and broken families from death, and that some of our town employees, in fact, qualify for affordable housing with their families. The report speaks of diversifying housing options, and it's a very detailed and incredibly well-thought-out plan that was adopted 4 or 5 years ago. The town's Affordable Housing Committee has asked us in the past, specifically when we were just there for Pine Tree a few years ago, why are we not, as a housing authority, proposing more projects or bigger projects on these sites that the housing authority can acquire? Why don't we add more floors to the buildings like at Pine Tree? Why don't we add more units, and why don't we add parking structures, because there's such a demand? And the authority, and Carol will elaborate, recognizes the need. There's a great need for these units. The 7 to 10 year wait is incredible for someone who really needs a unit and wants to remain in Fairfield. And they could do that if they wanted to, but they want to try to create properties that fit into our town and our neighborhood, and that is not making giant high-rise properties like they could under 830G on the property and on parcels in town. So that's a high-level executive overview of the corporation. Again, the Housing Corporation is the tax exempt with one member, the authority. And that's very common nationwide to do that, to have housing authorities not only in Connecticut but across the nation become single-member owners of 501c3 tax-exempt corporations, the corporation's sole purpose being to acquire and hold title to the properties for various financing options that are available to housing authorities and other ownership requirements. So it's not unusual to Fairfield. We do this all over. And again, I have with me Carol Martin, who's the executive director of our housing authority, who can elaborate on the High Street project if you want. She could talk about Pine Tree, answer Selectman Timniak's questions, and answer any other issues you may have.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, good to see you again, and thanks so much for inviting me. And Ed and Chris, very nice, obviously, to be appearing in front of you. And I thought maybe, Chris, I could answer your question about who we accept applications from. We accept applications from anyone, so you don't have to be a town resident to apply. We most recently opened up our wait list on June 3rd. Closed it on June 28th, and the wait list was open for Pine Tree and Trefoil. And we received 1,180 applications, of which, obviously, because we only operate 80 apartments, we've capped at accepting 100 for each property. So obviously, with those types of numbers, we're going to make a lot of folks very unhappy and a few folks very happy.
So when you get 1,100 applications, how do you prioritize? Like, how do you pick who goes in? How do you,
Right.
how do you do that?
Yeah, so we use a software package and we randomly select, so it's like a lottery system.
It's just a lottery. There's no point value based upon need or.
No, there's no fair housing. There's fair housing, both state and federal, that really doesn't allow us to affect the order of a wait list. And typically, when you're in communities where there's a huge need and you know that you're going to be overly subscribed, you use the random selection method. It's obviously the most objective process.
And when you went out to get to open up the process to get how many vacancies did you have? Or how many people were on the wait list, and you capped it at 100?
Right.
How many people were on the wait list to make you open up that process?
Right, so we had about 24, I believe, at Pine Tree, and probably about 25 or 26 at Trefoil. And Trefoil has 30 apartments. We currently have one vacant unit. We average at Trefoil probably 2 or 3 vacancies out of the 30 a year. In other words, it's a very, very low turnover. Likewise, at Pine Tree, we had 2 vacant apartments at Pine Tree. We have 50 units there, and we had about 24, 23 applicants. So obviously, when we go through the process, we'll add another 100 to that list.
So out of that 100, you randomly select who gets those 2 vacancies? Is that my?
No, the folks that are on the current wait list, they're in an order, and we will follow that order. What I'm saying is, when we get through the random selection method, we will add to the bottom of that list the new 100.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I got a couple of things.
Go ahead, Mr. Bajan.
Carol, who do you work for? Do you work for the town of Fairfield?
Right, so I don't work for the town of Fairfield. Actually,
The Fairfield Housing Authority.
correct, and, yeah, sorry.
Mike, anything that happens with the authority, does any of the money, the rent, anything like that hit our balance sheet or budget?
It does not. It's a separate organization. The only involvement is that I appoint the directors.
The directors of the Fairfield Housing Authority?
Correct.
And they're answerable to who? You or Carol?
I think, if I understand it, and
If the
Carol,
question, Ed, yeah, go.
the organization.
Yeah, sure. So Ed, I think the question is, who does the Housing Authority report to? We report to HUD and the folks that give us the money, so lenders and investors.
Okay, so I imagine Pine Tree was built a long time ago.
The original Pine Tree was built in 1964 and 66.
That's the big project that you have, right?
And then we redeveloped it. So the original structures were built in the 60s.
That money, was that HUD?
It was actually to redo it. Okay, so we got state money and we got private equity through private investors.
Okay, so when you went out and bought High Street, It's a combination of private money, and how's that working?
Sure. So how we purchased High Street was we earned a developer fee when we redeveloped Pine Tree. And then we went out to another nonprofit corp to provide us with $1 million loan so that we could meet the purchase price of the property.
So it's a combination of your self-funding portion of it
And a loan.
and a loan? Okay, I'll come back. I got to process that. You got anything? Go ahead, Mike.
And just to clarify, who owns kind of Pine Tree and Trefoil?
So there's a ground lease for both properties. So the leasehold interest is at Trefoil LLC, and at Pine Tree, it's Pine Tree Housing Limited Partnership. And you're probably wondering, why did we set up those organizations? In order to access the financing. At Trefoil, the Fairfield Housing Authority was unable to apply for the HUD-insured mortgage program. We're not an eligible applicant, so we had to set up a structure so that we could access the money. Likewise, with Pine Tree, we had to set up a partnership so that we could access low-income housing tax credits.
Okay. Who owns the property?
The property fee simple is owned by the Fairfield Housing Authority. The leasehold interest owner and title is with the LLC at Trefoil and the partnership at Pine Tree.
Okay, thank you. And are those both 830G operations also, or are they just, are they fall under that category, or are they set up differently?
No, they would meet the statute, the 830G requirements.
But weren't they set up before 830G was in play? I realize they may meet the statute today, so.
Right, Michael,
But-
and this is the frustration, right, with 830G. You're absolutely right. Trefoil was built in 1973, I believe, or 75, and it was prior to the statute. So the town wouldn't, under an 830G housing unit equivalent points, wouldn't receive any points under that. However, Pine Tree, because it was redeveloped, would receive points because it was
Okay.
built once the statute was put in place.
Just let me restate that, just so see if I understand that correctly. Because of when they were built, there's a lot of talk about within the 830G, as folks are talking about that. Certainly, a lot of our residents are looking at, can we get a moratorium, and we have to score so many points based on how many units we develop to get that moratorium. There are a couple things on that. One, in order to qualify, there are a number of qualifications in order to be considered affordable. One is something like a deed for a 40-year deed restriction. There are a few others. I don't mean to make that comprehensive.
Yeah.
But so if you're renting an apartment that falls within the affordable range, that doesn't count.
That's right.
All right, it has to have a deed restriction that says for the next 40 years, it will be affordable. So that's one. Two, and if their units were built before 1990, if I recall correctly, no units built before 1990 count towards our affordable housing stock, regardless of how nice they are, regardless of the rent, regardless of anything.
Correct.
All right, and that's the way the state statute is written.
Correct.
All right, and then within 830G, when you're building a unit, there are so many that need to be affordable, and some can be at market rate. Roughly, is it 2/3, 1/3? What's the?
Well, under an 830G scenario, 30% would need to be affordable, and the 70% could be market rate. And in order to apply for points under a set-aside, of that 30, 15% would be at 80% of area median income. The other 15% would be at 60% area median income.
All right, and those units have to be comparable. You can't construct different units for the affordable group as opposed to what you do for the market rate group.
They have to be like.
And there's 100 apartments, they're all equal, and somebody just decides which ones will be affordable and which ones aren't.
Correct.
Well, from an 830G standpoint, one of the things it does is kind of override some of the local regulations. But just to be clear, from a conservation standpoint, you have to follow, not you, but an 830G application has to follow all the conservation rules and regs,
Absolutely.
and all that, what I'm going to call life safety codes through building and through our building department, that type of thing, and our fire marshal from that standpoint. However, as Attorney Leclerc mentioned, where there's flexibility in development is on the zoning rules. So our zoning regs, and I'm going to say none of which have to be followed. Maybe Attorney Leclerc, I know, have got extensive zoning background. I know none is not a good word, but it's either none or mostly.
No, you can file an 830G project, and you can ask for a special zone to be created or a special permit with changing in the regulations. You can have a code change in the regulations, a text amendment, or you can just come in for approval without any of that, saying, I'm 830G, 2-story maximum height, I'm going up 15 stories.
Yep.
Setbacks of 10 feet, I'm going to 2 feet.
All right.
You don't have to follow any zoning at all. The only way they can be turned down is if it's a significant and demonstrated public safety effect or issue, that's all.
Thank you. And let me, again, restate that so I can say that simply. Basically, you don't have to follow any of our zoning regulations.
Correct.
Okay. And the most common or most stated reason in 830G, and we went through this on the Brunson Road property, and this was explained in great detail by some folks from Fair Housing in terms of what it is, but basically it would be a very significant public safety issue.
Correct. Significant life safety, public safety issue. And if you don't approve projects, not only will probably lose on appeal, you can have the federal government come down with HUD and the Inspector General's office, the OIG, for violations against the town for that action. And you hit another good point, and you talked about the 70% being market rate and the 30% affordable. Why that's significant? When the Housing Authority does project, this is going to be 80% affordable. That's significant because if you're coming in as a private developer with a 100-unit apartment on High Street or any other site building, which you could put in there under 830G easily, and you only have 30% affordable, because you have 70% market rate, you're not getting anywhere with your points because you're bringing so many more online that are non-market rate. The way 830G is set up, that was not, I don't think, well thought out as you add these non-market rate units, because developers will go with the minimum number possible, the 30%. You're not making really any significant progress towards getting to the moratorium, versus a project like the Housing Authority is proposing, because of its mission, mostly 80%, the majority affordable. You get to that stage with your numbers.
Well, thank you. I'd suggest that the moratorium is a temporary Band-Aid, but what bothers me most about the 830G program is I'm not sure it's certainly in the towns that I've had a chance to work in, both in my real estate career and here, I just haven't seen any progress on affordable housing because of that. It may help in other parts of the state somewhere, but I haven't seen it make any progress here. And the way the rules are set up, I don't see it, as you pointed out, helping with that. Let's see, if we go back to, you did mention the moratorium, thank you. Ms. Martin, if I can, at Trefoil and Pine Tree, there were, I think you said 50 units there that we...
50 at Pine Tree.
Pine Tree. And how many at the...
30.
Okay, so 80 in total? Now,
Correct.
we redeveloped some of those. How many of those units did we rebuild?
So at Pine Tree, we had 38 apartments. When we redeveloped it, we added 12 units to get to the 50.
And at the other one?
Trefoil was refinancing, so it was basically, renovations, but not adding any units. But I love that thought.
So at Pine Tree, where we took it, we basically rebuilt the building, all right? So did we completely knock it down?
Yes, we did.
And we totally rebuilt it. So we put 50 brand-new units up, and we only got credit for 12 because we only got credit for the increase. Is that correct?
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because there's another town that I am associated with that went through a similar thing where they had existing affordable units, knocked them down and rebuilt them. And they were only getting, in that particular case, they were only giving points to the net increase. But I think there is an argument, and I mean, obviously, it's something the town and, myself and obviously council can work towards. I think there is an argument to be made at Pine Tree that the town should get credit for the 50 apartments.
All right, now Pine Tree was completed a couple years ago,
Correct.
and my understanding is we've asked the state at this point to count all 50?
I wouldn't know. That would probably be something that Mark,
Understanding from Mark Barnhart.
okay. If Mark said it, it's golden.
That we've gotten,
Yep.
we've gotten 12 points in that regard, so the state has not been very cooperative in terms, even though we built 50 brand-new units, so there certainly is an issue with quality of construction or quality of the unit. That's where I come back to, it seems to be a rigged game to some degree. And
Understood. I'm more than happy, obviously, to help the town, though, when we get to a point to apply for a moratorium map.
Okay. Let's see, a couple things here. When FHA, Fairfield Housing Authorities, goes through a purchase, somebody told me at some point that there needs to be a public hearing before that purchase is done. Did we have a public hearing on that?
Yeah. So the Fairfield Housing Authority didn't purchase the property at 980 High Street. Title to the property is the Fairfield Housing Corp.,
Which is owned by the Fairfield Housing Authority.
which the single member is the Fairfield Housing Authority.
Okay.
Yep.
So
And-
you're able to get around that requirement by having the Fairfield Housing Corporation.
That's right. Under state law, and frankly, under state law, depending on, even if you're knocking down existing state-funded housing, you don't necessarily have to have a public hearing. Even the state doesn't have to have a public hearing. But in this particular case, those statutes, Michael, wouldn't be applicable because Fairfield Housing Corp. purchased it.
Yeah. What's the reason for the state asking the Fairfield Housing Authority or housing authorities in general to have a public hearing before purchasing land? Or purchasing a project?
Right, so typically it's, the state oversight is necessary if in fact we're disposing and displacing. Early on, and I'm going back now a while ago, housing authorities were knocking down, not here in Fairfield, but housing authorities were knocking down and economically displacing existing families that had been served by these properties. So these statutes are basically put into place so that folks are not, being forced economically out of their homes.
All right, so the state statute basically says a housing authority to buy land to do a project like this would have to have a public hearing first.
Sure.
And you're saying that because the housing corporation bought it, that gets around that requirement, so that's not necessary,
That statute is specific to a public housing authority.
even though the housing authority is the one member of the housing corporation.
It's the single member, correct? Yep.
That doesn't sound the most transparent.
I could only say,
Excuse me a moment, I'm going to ask the members in this room to be quiet and let this meeting conduct itself. This is part of our democratic process, to have this discussion, this report from the agency in full view of the public. If you cannot control yourself, I will ask you to leave. Thank you. Now, back to the item, please.
so what I was,
Seem to be as transparent as we would like in town government. And I'm saying that from two respects. You can talk about the housing authority, but part of my concern is it's the Fairfield Housing Authority. Even though it's not part of the town government, by most folks, it's viewed as part of that. And because it operates for a long term to affordable project in town, it's very much part of our culture and what's taking place. And as we've talked in the past, I was concerned about the appearance of, frankly, a lack of trust and transparency in how that was conducted. Can you give us some background on that?
sure. So first, Michael, not that this will, change your opinion, but most housing authorities that are functioning in the state, and I would probably say across the country, do this all the time where they set up nonprofit development corps. So I don't know if that gives you any level of comfort, but this isn't something that's atypical. This is something that's very typical. Regarding the purchase of the property, we spent a lot of time, obviously, contemplating the purchase price. I don't think anyone, whether you're in state government or local government, doesn't spend a lot of time and frankly scrutiny on purchasing and laying out $2.1 million because that's what's risk here. So as far as transparency, this was a private sale that typically a nonprofit would not be able to purchase. But because we had a willing seller and obviously a well-capitalized nonprofit, we were able to make the transaction happen. So it may seem atypical because you don't normally have nonprofits purchasing 2.4 acres of land in Fairfield. So that I do appreciate. It seems peculiar or strange because it's not normal. But because, we were successful in redeveloping the Pine Tree property, and, the worst challenge, I guess, Michael, that any executive director of a housing authority has is you have $1.2 million sitting in the bank, and your phone is ringing off the hook for people that want housing. So, my job, frankly, is to meet the needs within this town and not have dollars sitting in a bank account. So I don't really think that, and I appreciate your point, well taken, but I don't think there was anything certainly done by, myself, the seller's attorneys, or, anybody at town hall. I had obviously wanted to make sure that if we invested the 2.1 million, that we had a reasonable chance of actually building the project.
You're saying the authority had $1.2 million in the bank?
The Fairfield Housing Corp. had $1.2 million in the bank.
Where did the Housing Corp get that money from?
Through the redevelopment, the earned development fees from Pine Tree.
This is, you may want to ask Carol, it's very complex financing of these projects. It's not, there are significant tax credits available to private investors and businesses who have significant assets to invest in these type of properties that the Housing Authority can never have access to, or a private developer would not have access to. That's how the federal government has allowed entities like a housing authority that wants to make most of these affordable, something a private developer never could do. No private developer could come in here, buy this property for this fair market value, and make it 80% or make it even 50% affordable. The numbers just don't work because the rents have to be affordable. The building's going to cost the same no matter what. The Housing Authority can make this mostly affordable because the people get an incentive to invest the money to the Housing Corporation. If I was a wealthy person and I was looking for a tax benefit and certain tax advantages, I would use the federal law to invest and to loan money to that to get certain tax credits for these projects, which would then the federal government allows those, so housing authorities and corporations that are owned by the authorities can develop properties that become almost entirely affordable. So maybe you want to talk, that explains a little, it wasn't a transparency issue, it's strictly a financing, very complex financing issue involved.
Well, it's not transparent nonetheless, Mr. Leclerc, so thank you. However, to one of the points Mr. Leclerc made, a private developer wouldn't be able to get this financing. It wouldn't be financially feasible. How did the Fairfield Housing Corporation finance this?
Right, so the project isn't financed yet, and I guess where Attorney Leclerc was leading to is, private developers come in with private equity. Because the Fairfield Housing Corp. is a 501c3 and we're mission-driven for affordable housing, we're obviously able to access low-income housing tax credits and soft loans from either the federal or state governments to build this type of housing. We're a little bit upside down. 830G is 70% market rate and 30% affordable, and even then we know that it drives the cost of units goes up. With us, we're upside down. We have 20% market rate and 80% affordable.
Yeah, I'm just focused on the financing at the moment. 7 or 8 years ago, prior to you joining the Fairfield Housing Authority, it was in significant financial issues with HUD. It owed several $100,000. It owed over $100,000 to the town. So one of my concerns is financially where it is at this point and how it got, where the $1.2 million come from and what's happened to those debts in the meantime. So if you could fill us in a little bit on that, that would be good.
And, Michael, obviously, when I walked in the door, you're absolutely right. The financial and the balance sheet of the Fairfield Housing Authority was actually in very bad shape. Through some really good volunteers that I report to that are, best interest is the town of Fairfield, of course. We were able to do a refi at Trefoil, and we were able to take some equity out of that refi, and we were able to pay the town back, thank goodness, because the town waited, obviously, for a portion of that money, as well as we negotiated with HUD. And I know you've probably had the pleasure once in a while to negotiate with a federal agency, but we were successful in getting 2 repayment agreements executed. So we are paying the federal government back. So that's good news that we've been able to, basically get the balance sheet back to where it needs to be. And because we were successful, again, and it's not me, Michael, or, Ed and Chris, it's really the folks that, I report to, and with the town's support, very successful at Pine Tree, to the tune of $1.2 million of earned fees. So,
Of the $300,000 or so we owed HUD, how much of that money has been paid back and how much is still owed to HUD?
sure. So, and I just took a look at the draft audited financial sheet, so bear with me, I can get you the exact numbers.
Okay.
But out of, I want to say when I walked in the door, there was probably about $600,000 owed back to the federal government. We're probably down to, I'm guessing, $360,000. And we have long-term repayment agreements, so we're paying it out over time.
Yeah, part of my concern is that the Fairfield Housing Authority almost folded. I remember sitting in a conference room upstairs, literally pleading with HUD
Yep.
to give us a chance to restructure things and get that back, so that we didn't lose the Fairfield Housing Authority as an entity, and didn't lose the operation at Pine Tree and Trefoil.
It was true leadership, Michael, really, because I know HUD was ready to come in and,
So my concern is, where did we get $1.2 million from, and how come we didn't use it to pay off HUD?
sure. So the repayment agreements are in place.
Yep.
As long as that we continue to pay it, we're paying back money that was owed to the federal government.
Right.
The reason we're not using that 1.2 million is because we're creating more units. So we have a loan agreement.
Could have used that $1.2 million to pay off HUD.
Well, we could, but there's no incentive. There would be no incentive to do that. We're not going to ever see that money. So we would put it into, right, the business decision is to create more affordable housing. I couldn't agree more. Walking in and seeing a $600,000 debt to HUD is a little bit frustrating for me in my profession. But having said that, HUD is more than willing to execute and take their payments. And, HUD really worked with us. I mean, our loans are out 40 years. So that was something, if they could have made a demand of us, Michael. But, it was a tough negotiation. But, HUD's in the mission of creating affordable housing in local communities. So, we were aligned when we were negotiating.
So where did the $1.2 million come from?
Earned developer fees from the Pine Tree project.
Okay, that's what they're labeled. How did the money get in the bank? Who paid on? Who wrote the check, and how'd they
The
get?
tax credit investor,
Okay. So tell me,
private money
private money came in and they got tax credits for doing that, so that's why they.
over the next 10 years. And, when you know this more probably, and Chris and Ed knows this, the real estate market here in Fairfield is very strong. And so if the town and the Housing Authority and some of the other nonprofits get together, this is a market where tax credits are sold no problem. This is not, St. Louis, Missouri, no disrespect to my friends in St. Louis, but, this is a bold market, and this program actually is a really good investment entity and structure to take advantage of.
Yeah, because where I'm coming from is what I remember is working with you up in Hartford and going up there to visit the Department of Housing and talking to them about the financing you needed to do Pine Tree and put that back, and you did a great job on that presentation up there, and that money was able to go through. But I also remember that it wasn't a slam dunk, that it was some significant concerns as to whether they would support that refinancing and whether we could get that. So in this case, you've got 1.2 million in the bank. Where did the rest of the funding come from?
We had gotten a loan from Sasko Creek Development Corp., which is a 501c3 nonprofit corp that the Westport Housing Authority set up to expand affordable housing in Westport.
Okay, obviously you have a close working relationship with them. Aren't you still executive director of the Westport Housing Authority?
I am.
Okay, who runs that?
And I've been executive director of the Westport Housing Authority since 2007.
Yeah, that's where we found you, for Fairfield Housing Authority. And you came highly recommended.
Thank you, Michael.
But the Sasko Group, why was the funding come from that as opposed to the?
A bank.
Right.
It was a lot easier to get the money, and the terms and conditions were a lot more friendly.
Okay, forgive me for asking it this way, but you're on both sides of the transaction. How does that work?
Well, no, actually, I'm not on both sides of the transaction. The two boards are the ones that decide how the transaction works. All I do is bring the facts to the boards.
Okay.
So,
But you're executive director of the Westport Housing Authority. Do they own the Sasko Creek group you talked about?
they're the sole member of the Sasko Creek Development Corp. Yes. Again, it's because it's the model that's, been used.
And you're the executive director on the Fairfield Housing side.
I'm the executive director of the Fairfield Housing Authority. Sure.
Who are the board of directors of the Fairfield Housing Corporation?
We have Jerry Stuhlman, who I think you know, Carol Landsman, and Rita Waterman.
There are three. Are they members of the board anywhere else?
Well, Rita and Carol are also, as you know, you appointed them. They're members of the board at the Fairfield Housing Authority. They're commissioners.
Okay, and what are how are they appointed to the Fairfield Housing Corporation board? Who appoints them?
Well, it's spelled out in the operating agreement. The Fairfield Housing Authority has the right to remove or appoint the directors of the corp.
So the Fairfield Housing Authority basically appointed a majority of their board to run the Fairfield Housing Corporation.
Correct. And that's, very typical because you don't want to set up a nonprofit that you don't have, any type of control over. The Fairfield.
Sounds like it was set up to avoid that type of control, certainly to make it a lot less transparent. So that's what I'm trying to understand.
Sure. So we talked maybe a little bit about this, but, the reason housing authorities don't buy land anymore, and the reason the housing authorities, create nonprofit corps is to access monies that a housing authority can't access. What's going on, nationally with housing policy is, HUD and, just government has decided, they would like to get out of, owning real estate and managing units. And I actually think it's a really good decision. Having said that, some of the vehicles that they're creating to help that happen absolutely requires, housing authorities to set up these nonprofit corps.
All right. But you can see how it looks. It's
Sure.
money coming from an organization that you are very closely related to in Westport, offering money at below market rates to a group on this side that has a history of some significant financial issues. So it is the sole member. Who's liable for any debts to the housing corporation?
Who's liable? The corporation is.
Right. What if they can't pay their bills? Who's liable then?
Who would be liable would be, I guess, Fairfield Housing Authority for some,
And see, that's where I was going, because
Yeah.
I'm worried about the financial sustainability of Fairfield Housing Authority.
Right.
Taking on a big debt
So
like this.
Right, so the corp's assets
Yep.
and liabilities eventually get rolled back to the Fairfield Housing Authority. And that's very typical of, the articles of organization and the operating agreement signed between the two entities.
Yeah, I've been hogging the microphone here.
Chris?
Timiak, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. There's a couple things I want to jump in on. One, I think I'm a little confused on where. I know you're on the hot seat right now, clearly, and the decisions the housing authority made were made by people you appointed.
To the Housing Authority
To the
Board,
Housing
not the
Authority.
Housing Corporation Board. Yes. At least it's some of them, the majority, I think, but not all.
So who appoints all the members to the board?
Which board, Chris?
The Housing
Fairfield-
Authority, the Housing Authority had to vote on this, right?
That's correct. The Housing Authority Board of Commissioners voted to set up Fairfield Housing Corp.
Right, okay.
That's correct.
And they were appointed by the first selectman.
The 5 members of the Housing Authority Board are appointed by that, 4 of them are appointed by the first selectman, one's a resident member. And then there are apparently 3 directors that run the Housing Corporation that are appointed by the Fairfield Housing Authority.
Right, so I followed that part. So are we?
A 2-level board, if you will.
Right, so we're questioning here the wisdom of that board through Carol? Or are we questioning Carol's decision to put this proposal in front of that board?
My question is simple. I'm trying to understand the transparency of the whole issue. I'm trying to understand if this, in fact, sorry? I'm trying to understand if, what sort of transparency and accountability there is through this process. It seemed like it was a 1-step process before, now it's a 2-step. Concerned about the financial stability of the Housing Authority, given recent history, and especially, and concerned that the Housing Corporation is extending itself out to the tune of $1 million that they got in a kind of below market rates from in essence, a Westport entity that's in the same business and closely related. So this seems like trying to figure out how much arm's length transaction and how much non-arm's length transaction.
So, and I understand that, and I see there's a packed room here tonight, and I look at housing as a issue across town, and I keep seeing developments pop up all over the place, which just simply don't belong in the neighborhoods they're going in. And we never call in any of the private developers to come in here and go through this. I understand that there's, a tie to this. I don't like it. I don't like what's going on. I don't. I simply don't.
Chris and Michael, just want point of clarification. So I don't have the operating agreement in front of me. The assets of the corp would go back to the Housing Authority, but not the liabilities. So the Housing Corp would stand on its own. If it couldn't pay its debt, it would not be able to pay its debt. Now, obviously, creditors and debtors could chase the Fairfield Housing Corp.
Can I jump in?
Please, Mr. Basin, go
I
ahead.
want to follow up. I see where you were going, and I see where you guys were going. I was more concerned about the town of Fairfield being a guarantor on anything. I
Correct.
think that goes to your point about if these guys run into financial trouble, it goes back to the FHA.
They were
What is the tie
7
between-
years ago, they were almost out of business.
Right. And you're talking about you were up in a room.
Yep.
So that
With-
means
with
somehow
HUD.
we are connected.
Well, we weren't directly. They allowed us to sit there, and HUD allowed us to sit in on that, and we basically pleaded with HUD to keep the Fairfield Housing Authority in operation.
Okay. I'm worried about the liabilities.
Agreed.
Can I,
And I don't see it being answered forcefully here. No, it doesn't come back on us.
sure. So, Brian, do you by any chance have a copy of our operating agreement?
I don't have the operating
Okay. So here's what we'll do. We'll provide the operating agreement of Fairfield Housing Corp. directly to you so you folks can take a look at it.
Send it to our lawyer too, Stanton Lesser.
Sure. Sure. One thing about transparency, I would like to get back to that. The Fairfield Housing Authority, when we created the 501c3, our agendas are posted, our board meets, we have a public portion of the meeting. So, minutes are produced. So I just want you folks to know that, we post our agenda, the meeting dates are on the town calendar, and, we created the nonprofit back in 2013, I believe.
And I want to go, Brian, you mentioned earlier, or Attorney Leclerc, you mentioned earlier, in a document the Board of Selectmen voted on in 2013. Can you, I wasn't on the board at that time. Can you walk me through what the Board of Selectmen voted for?
Yeah, back in the town's affordable housing plan, we as a community have an affordable housing plan, and it was commissioned by the Board of Selectmen back in 2013, and it was adopted by your body back in 2014, and it is the affordable housing plan for the town of Fairfield. And in the plan, the Board of Selectmen, your board, specifically noted there's an ongoing need for affordable housing and that the town needed to work proactively to meet the needs of the residents with respect to affordable housing. And again, that was adopted in 2014 after many charrettes, meetings, discussions with the community. And
Was that an effort to chase, Mike, was that an effort to chase our percentage of affordable housing we have in a town to meet the 830-G?
Directly, no. The affordable housing plan was an update on an existing affordable housing plan. We were one of the first movers in adopting affordable housing plans going back to First Selectman Jackie Durrell.
So,
And this was an update on those plans that was taking place.
I have yet to see an 830-G proposal which any neighborhood supports. What has the town done to stop 830-G proposals through the state? To advocate against them? Clearly, by the size of the room here tonight and the amount of projects we have coming through the door, the lack of development in the state of Connecticut through businesses and corporation growth, the avenue developers are going to make a profit is by developing low-income housing, and they're putting it in neighborhoods which the neighbors don't want it. Neighborhoods are having a hard time supporting it, and I'm looking at things the town's done to actually support that growth. And I'm wondering if we've done anything on the other side to say, wait a second, I don't think this 830-G is the right avenue. I don't think it's the right. We're chasing a goal which we're not going to reach. Those are my thoughts.
Simply put, to change it means changing the state statute. So it's ongoing dialogue we've had with our state delegation, as well as going up to Hartford to talk to various representatives at the assembly level and in the Department of Housing to talk about what the impact is down here and how it's not achieving the goals and what is happening to our towns and our neighborhoods because of that.
And I see it, and it's very frustrating to me. I'm wondering if we update those documents to express what the neighbors and the town wants to see. I mean, have you seen any 830-G proposals? People are like, hey, this is great. I'm excited to have this here in my neighborhood. And here we have in front of us today what I would consider one of the most legitimate ones, but through the Housing Authority, which is going to actually put in 80% and to meet that objective versus a private developer. But again, it doesn't fit. It's not fitting the neighborhood. And I mean, all these questions. My frustration's rising on that.
Yep. No, I've been pretty vocal about how I feel in terms of about the size of this development and what's taken place. However, go ahead, Mr. Bateson.
Yeah, Chris, I agree with everything you said. I mean, when it comes to how we're handling this, I agree with everything you said. I wanted, from this presentation tonight, I was hoping to get some clarity, and unfortunately, I'm leaving the room more confused than I was before I came in. To Carol's point, every time she mentioned very typical of government, very typical of government. My personal dealings with government is whenever government touches it, it becomes overly complicated and doesn't work. So when she says things are very typical, it doesn't make sense. That's why I think we're struggling with the transparency on this, that we have to set up LLCs and so forth and private entities to make these things happen so somebody could achieve the tax credits. That I understand, but it's just backwards. And
Well, that's federal policy that we're dealing with. Remember, they've created.
That's why, you know what? That's why we're all confused.
HUD does not want to own properties, and they've created these tax credits that require housing authorities around the country who have to fulfill their mission and act under the guidance and the umbrella of HUD to create these entities for individuals with means to come in and get major tax credits and pay big fees to get a tax credit. People, it's hard to get your hands around that. Most of us don't understand what it means to buy a tax credit. That's something most of us will never do.
Sorry, Brian. My takeaway, what I wanted to get here tonight is I understand that we have a goal to provide affordable housing, that we're below the state standard. I understand that. I just want to make sure that
That's a pretty arbitrary state standard, I would point out.
Yeah, but I want to make sure that what we're doing passes the smell test. And to your point, I'm leaving the room tonight not happy.
Well, and I want to, like, we don't call all the other developers into the Board of Selectmen meeting to have their plans and go over all their, and that's where I'm confused, and I saw this on the agenda, and I get it, but we don't have a vote on this up or down.
We don't.
We don't. We, like, you're here giving a,
This is not about the projects per se, but it is about the Fairfield Housing Authority, which I think, as this board, we do need to understand what's taking place out there. I think we have an obligation to our residents to make sure that things are happening in a clear and transparent manner. When I look at, a structure that gets around the idea of a public hearing before that happens, when in the past, when we needed funding to redo the Pine Tree Apartments, the town was part of that. We went up and supported that. In this case, we didn't hear about it till way after the fact. And when I look at something with Fairfield's name on it, the town of Fairfield's name on it, yeah, I am concerned.
I'm with
And
you.
when I-
Yeah.
Let me finish.
I know.
When I look at that and say that I think that creates a greater obligation, not a legal obligation certainly, but I think a greater obligation to be a good neighbor through all this in terms of what we're looking at. And when I'm hearing that below-market financing was used to help develop this, I'm not sure another developer what they would have come in with. But in any event, I think that with the Fairfield's name on it, and I think one of my requests at some point would be you guys look at changing that so it's clear that you're not part of the town of Fairfield. But I think that we have a greater obligation to our neighbors and to the town to both help affordable housing, but do it in a well-managed fashion. And I have significant concerns about, and as much as this is not about the project, I do have concern about this project, but also how we got here. And that's my concern, Chris, from a standpoint of, if we don't discuss it here, when does it happen? A developer doesn't have to come before us, doesn't have to do that, but we have I would like to think we have a closer relationship for the Fairfield Housing Authority. And certainly, as someone who is in charge of, has the responsibility for appointing board members, yeah, I'd like to know that and have this discussion in public, so any future board members.
Are the board
would
members here?
Actually, I have one board member here, John Matteo, who would like to, you've known, he's been involved many years in Fairfield in various capacities. He'd like to address this issue. And I'm not sure, to answer your question, we could take the name of Fairfield off of the Housing Authority, given
So
the state statutes we have.
thank you, John, for coming. That goes to, the process. When we appoint members of boards, we usually have the chairman of the building committee come in front of us, and I'm happy to see you're here, I guess.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. And we do appreciate this discussion. I would like to address a couple of points that were raised, particularly about transparency. And I want to make this very clear, and I want to talk about financial obligations, which I know is an important point. But let's start with transparency. The reason that the Fairfield Housing Corporation was established was not to avoid transparency. We were not trying to avoid transparency. We were trying to set up a vehicle that would allow us to have financing options that the Housing Authority didn't have. We did the same thing for other projects, and what Carol is saying is that this is being done all over the country. This is the model that is being used, okay? And so there's nothing, it sounds very opaque, and you set up a corporation, and you have board members sitting on that corporation, they're sitting on two boards. It does sound very opaque, okay, but it's not. All of our meetings are open, all of our meetings have public sessions, all of them are advertised. The board members, I'm one of 4 board members other than the tenant member that was appointed. The chairperson of the Housing Authority, Fairfield Housing Authority, could not be here this evening, otherwise she would have been. So I'm here in her place. But the board members appointed 2 members to the Fairfield Housing Corporation to make sure that there was control. We wanted to make sure that corporation didn't go do anything we didn't think was in the best interest of the town of Fairfield. So again, the point is that there was not an attempt to avoid transparency. I think you raised a good point as to whether or not this is as transparent as it would have been if it had been acquired by the Housing Authority, and that's probably something that we should look at. But I don't want anybody to leave this room tonight to think that the intent was to avoid transparency, because it was not. I'd like to address the issue of the financial situation and obligations. And you're absolutely right, Mr. First Selectman. Several years ago, the Fairfield Housing Authority was in dire straits in terms of its financials. Carol has done an exceptional job of righting that ship. And the decision, and you raised an interesting point, could we have used that $1.2 million that we had as a profit through the Fairfield Housing Corporation, or Tree File, was it Pine Tree? So we had money that we could have used to pay off that outstanding debt to HUD. It was a business decision, and I believe a proper business decision, since we had a financing plan in place with HUD. HUD was happy with the plan. We were happy with the plan. We would have rather used that capital to try to provide additional affordable housing. We think, as a Fairfield Housing Authority board, that's a correct business decision. Okay, you can disagree with it, but we think it was the correct business decision. In terms of obligations, whether it's for the existing properties that we have, or if we are able to develop the property on High Street, the town has no obligations, nor does the Fairfield Housing Authority. Part of the reasons that these separate corporations are set up is so that they are financially independent, and we don't assume the obligations of those corporations. Fairfield Housing Authority doesn't guarantee any of the loans, okay, and it doesn't guarantee anything regarding those developments. Each of those developments are standalone projects. They are reviewed, the finances of those projects are reviewed by equity investors who put millions of dollars into those projects, okay, and by the government agencies that fund them. And as part of that financial review, they look over a 15-year period at projected operating expenses and income, and they make their independent decisions that we're going to invest millions of dollars and we're going to fund these projects based on their belief that those projects will not have problems in the future. Doesn't mean problems don't exist, but part of the financing is to create project reserves, we call replacement reserves and operating reserves, so that if problems exist in the future, those funds are there to handle that, so that those entities don't have to look back to the Fairfield Housing Authority, and the Fairfield Housing Authority doesn't have to look back to the town. So the finances of these developments, again, are standalone. They're reviewed by other agencies. They're reviewed by for-profit equity investors to make sure that these are good investments. So the Housing Authority Board feels very comfortable that we're not creating any additional obligations for the town, nor ourselves, okay? And the other thing that I would like to say is that earlier this evening, I think everybody in this room was happy when volunteers were appointed to different boards, okay? And I don't think anybody in this room thought that person is going on that board because they're going to make money somehow, okay? And that's, I don't know if those words were specifically used, but certainly the intimation at a meeting that I went to at Holland Hill was that the members of the Fairfield Housing Authority Board and/or the members of the Fairfield Housing Corporation were somehow being enriched by these developments. So I'm going to reinforce what Carol said before. Not one member of the Fairfield Housing Authority receives any payment, okay, for their volunteer work. They don't receive any payment from any of these projects. We don't get reimbursed travel. We don't get reimbursed meals, although we could put in for those, but we don't. So I think that I'm very happy to have a discussion like this so we can get every piece of information out. I'm very happy to have a discussion like we're going to have later tonight about the substantive merits of the project. And the residents have raised some very legitimate issues, okay, in terms of parking and traffic and conservation issues. Those are all legitimate issues, okay, that should be discussed, and we should address the merits of those. But I hope we can address the merits of those without the intimation that somehow the board members are doing this to enrich themselves. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk before you and
Well, thank you
see a
for,
question.
Yep, thank you for clarifying that. Thank you for stepping up to make that. Mr. Bateson.
Yeah, John,
Yep.
quick question.
Sure.
seems like you have a good handle on the finance end of this and where your head's at. The $1.2 million that we earned from the redevelopment fee, we're going into this project, assuming that it moves forward. Will you be generating another fee similar to that that's going to wind up on your balance sheet when you're done with this?
We hope so. The way these financing
That's your
projects-
sustainability model going forward?
Correct, that's correct.
Okay, and it looks like that, I haven't heard anything on this board for years about a development, something like this. So it looks like what's changed is when you redid our current projects, you earn this fee, now you have money. And I agree with your decision not to pay it back to the federal government. And I get that you're better stewards of the money than paying it back. I get that business decision.
Yep.
So is this your sustainability model going forward, that this is your seed money to keep going?
Correct. And again, we can operate without this, just in terms of continued operation, and we could sort of squeak by, but this does create seed money to do additional affordable housing developments, or if there's a problem, okay, that we need to address, okay, this is a way to increase the finances of ultimately the housing authority.
Okay, that I get. Mike, just one follow-up. The only thing I heard that caught my ear is our relationship with FHC.
The authority of the corporation.
The corporation. Is you said, or I heard earlier in all of this, is that they owed the town $100,000. Why would
The Fairfield Housing Authority.
The authority.
At one
Why would they
point-
owe the town $100,000 after?
This goes back 7 or 8 years. Actually, it goes back much longer than that, but I came into it 8 years ago. And the town had been doing some processing, payroll processing, and other invoice processing for the authority. And they had done it in advance of getting paid. And the authority did not pay the money on a timely basis. So one of the things we came into, and it was discussed both at Board of Selectmen and at Board of Finance meetings in that timeframe, that we sat down and worked out an immediate payment program from the authority, and there was about $65,000. We agreed to let them pay us back over time when they're able, and I think if I understand Ms. Martin correctly, that has been paid back. So there's no money at this point that's been owed to the town.
And what was that $65K for?
I'd have to go back and look, but different items from insurance to payroll that the town had paid in advance of receiving payment from the authority.
Okay, so there is a business relationship between the town and the FHA.
Not
anymore.
Not anymore. At that time,
Well, that was, if you'll let me.
I was going to get to the
If
chase.
you'll let me.
You may go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
One of the first things we did is make sure that stopped entirely, because those funds were not authorized by town bodies to be spent. We clarified that for our finance department and the management of the finance department at the time, that should not have been set up that way. It was not authorized, and we made sure that going forward.
Okay, so we're not
it
doing
was
anything of the sorts now?
It's completely separate at this point.
I was going to add, there was an embezzlement.
That's the way I'd like to keep it.
There was an embezzlement at that time, and the person in charge of the authority created a system where the town was paying bills they shouldn't have paid for the authority, basically. There was an embezzlement by that individual, and an arrest was made, and there was,
Yeah,
that's how we got.
Again, independent of the issues on the authority side, the town didn't have the authorization to do that from the appropriate boards, and
Correct.
that should never have happened.
Correct, and it can't happen anymore because changes were put into place keeping those checks ever being paid from the town to the authority.
And then just one final question, if I might, from a tax standpoint. It's a non-for-profit organization. Will taxes be owed, and how's that going to work?
Right, so we currently are paying taxes on the property that, when I say we, Fairfield Housing Corp., we're currently paying real estate taxes on the property. Certainly, when we go back through redevelopment, we're going to need to work with the town the assessor, et cetera, to, be able to underwrite to what the taxes are going to be paid once it's redeveloped. So that's, obviously, if we are lucky enough to get that far, it'll be a discussion for another day. But long and short of it is, these properties typically do pay taxes, but they don't pay full fair market taxes because of the fact that when the mill rate goes up, we're not allowed to increase our rents. So, they're disconnected. So they're valued, completely different typically than, a fair market rental.
All right, thank you. Any further questions from the board?
Is the only control we have as a board, the only control we have is your appointments?
Correct.
Right. That's it.
That's my understanding.
That's what I'm getting out of this. So we ended up in this spot because the people appointed to the Housing Authority made a decision to purchase this property, to do a development there, to fulfill their mission statement, which we adopted in the 60s. When did we adopt the Housing Authority, Brian?
1964.
Yeah, created in 64. And we have, I guess I would say it's better than a private developer going ahead and doing something bigger, biggest. I'm at a loss. I've never had one of these come in front of us at the Board of Selectmen before. I'm at a total loss.
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
But the project is not before us.
Right.
The Housing Authority is in terms of understanding how it works and what's taken place here. And I think in terms of the process, to me, that was a very important discussion to have, to kind of lay out a certain amount of clarity and also to identify some of the areas that aren't transparent and make a request to the Housing Authority and the Housing Corporation that in the future they conduct themselves in a more transparent process. And in a simple sense, as much as a public hearing wasn't required because it wasn't the Housing Authority buying this, I think that it would have made much more sense and produced a certain amount of credibility with the town and the neighbors if that process had been followed, rather than just saying we don't have to do that. We don't have to operate that way because we created a subsidiary that doesn't need to follow the rules that the authority does. I think it's stepping back, looking at that. And I think secondly, because the name Fairfield's on it, I think there's certainly not a legal obligation, but I think there's an ethical obligation to keep the town appraised as to how that's working. But that I think ends my questions at the moment. Mr. Bateson, do you have any further?
I have no questions. My takeaway is, I think the discussion was warranted. It's helped me. It hasn't gotten me to my happy place on this issue.
No.
A private sale, no public hearing. Carol, forgive the way of summing it up, but, these LLCs and your involvement apparently on two sides, even though it isn't two sides. I get all this, and the discussion was warranted. It hasn't gotten me where I need to be, though, but
All right.
I got it.
Well, with
But then
that,
again, I don't have a vote.
Yeah, well, I don't like the neighborhood situation. I don't like what it does to the neighbors. But that's just me, my opinion. I have no way to vote on that right now. Sorry.
all right, Ms. Martin, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, next item up. From the Director of Public Works to hear a report on the Sullivan Independence Hall parking expansion project. Oh.
Thank you, Joe Michelangelo, Director of Public Works. This isn't the biggest project that Public Works is doing, but because it's on the Town Hall campus, it's a visible place. Just wanted to give a brief update, and we're doing a little innovation on this. As you know, there's oftentimes a parking congestion in our rear lot here, especially during the AM permitting time, bid openings, ZBA meetings, et cetera, where people are parking all over the place. They're not getting a parking spot. So one of the things we designed is on the back half of the property, the grass strip over there, we designed some overflow parking. We looked at a couple different measures, whether we were going to use gravel, a pea stone, or a similar type product. This will be going before the HDC tomorrow afternoon, because we are in a historic district. But what we selected behind there is a porous asphalt paving for maintenance purposes and drainage purposes. And I wanted to tell you about this project because we're also doing that at the train station project, which is going on currently. So about 15% of the train station property will be pervious pavement. So it'll run down the hill from the condos. When it gets to the small area in the building there, instead of going in catch basins, it'll literally sink right through the pavement there. So that's what we're doing on this project here. You'll see it starting within the next week or two, and about 30 days, and it should address a parking issue and a green, innovative type design. Jerry, I cued Jerry over there. This is a sample of the pervious pavement, and it literally is pervious. Water goes right through it. So it's a good process. We think it'll work for the train station. We think it'll work at Indy Hall, and we're excited to do this project.
All right, Mr. Bateson.
How many spaces?
20 spaces will be added.
And when you say this parking lot's going to be open all the time,
Correct. So it's exactly
you say 20 spaces?
30 spaces.
So the cars are going to be pointed facing the marsh?
Correct.
Okay. Conservation's fine with this?
Conservation staff signed off on it, yes.
Okay. And does it affect, there's no soccer fields there, that's the open space, right?
There is a under 6 soccer field, which they do play in afternoons. This will not affect, this won't go into soccer field. In fact, it'll give them some nice parking spots.
All right. Is that tree gone? There used to be a tree there.
There are no trees being taken out for this project.
Okay.
Yeah, this just runs along the edge of the parking lot there. It's like one car length deep.
And this is going to be all town, not museum?
The museum, it runs over into in front of the museum partially too, so the museum can use it as they wish also.
Okay. Isn't there some sort of town hall green commission?
There's that, there's,
Jelly?
Like jelly. There was a project design project they put together to look extensively at what I'm going to call an extensive and comprehensive redesign of the whole town hall campus between 2 buildings, rearranging a lot of things. There were a number of pushbacks on that, both from town hall employees and managers, as well as from some of the neighbors. However, we are going back, and one of the ongoing strategic issues is lack of parking at Sullivan Independence Hall. What this does is, for a minimal cost, create 30 more parking spaces that can be available for either museum events or town hall business during the day, and still not impact the Parks and Rec use of the fields and back.
So this was a portion of the overall plan that we are incorporating this segment. And I'll probably give you an update next month about some other improvements we're going to make on
Have we
the...
used this pavement anywhere? Have we used this yet?
We have not, but there is porous pavement up at Fairfield University, and one of the car lots on Commerce Drive has this thing.
How long has Fairfield you had it?
I think about 6 or 7 years now.
Okay, no issues with flash freezing, water getting trapped in there, heaving?
No, goes right through, no. No, they have not had issues. It is more expensive than regular pavement, so the plants do have to shut down and gear up. They use a different oil, a different stone in there. But once again, yeah, so the train station thing, we don't want to use it 100%. We want to use it where the water's going to attract. So we think it's a good product for both of these, and hopefully we'll expand it to other projects.
How does it hold up to snowplow?
From what we've heard, it holds up well. And one of the reasons why we're decided on this product here is, if there's a gravel or pea stone, there's a maintenance issue with the lot and the grass and the soccer field. So we felt this was the best approach for this application.
Oh, we're not voting on this either.
No, just informational.
Update.
Because it's a high visibility
This
location.
is going to show up in back of Town Hall. The concern is Board of Selectmen may get questions about it. Want to make sure you know what we're
So I'm
up to.
assuming you have money in your budget for this?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. That it? Any further questions?
No.
All right, Joe, thank you.
Thank you.
No, we're
I
fine.
think we're good. But thank you. Next item up. Item number 8, to hear an update from the Strategic Plan Committee. Mr. Nguyen.
So thank you for having John Nguyen for Chair of the Strategic Plan Committee. We've submitted materials, which includes a deck that I'll walk you through. It's about 30 or 40 slides. It's about 2 hours worth of material that I'll try and get through in about 7 or 8 minutes. I'm going to use the first 8 slides in that deck to guide us through it. It's consistent with what's being shared and updated to many of the town boards, commission, department heads, et cetera, as we move into the next phase of the project. It's the PowerPoint sort of deck that we'll talk through. I'll come back to this at the end, but I want to make sure I provide the opportunity, if not tonight, then however you would like to do it, for the 3 members of the board to provide us with ideas and thoughts around key initiatives that we need to be thinking about as part of our strategic planning process, major strategies to think about, and any big ideas that you might have that you really would say, this is really something to think about. I want to make sure that I have the full opportunity to get the right kind of insights from all 3 of you members by email, conversations, however you'd like to do it, and I'll get that incorporated into our planning process. Sound reasonable?
Good, thank you.
So we flip to page 2. I'll only cover through page 8. The rest is for background. What I wanted to try and do is provide an update on our strategic plan development status, the community outreach results, and the next steps in finalizing the strategy. Moving on to page 3. You've seen this chart before, shown it to you several times. On the right-hand side of the chart is kind of where we are now, where I've highlighted it in red. We're moving from that 3rd vertical column, where we've gathered all sorts of different type of community feedback, and moving into the steps where we're going to have a more focused set of steps to develop and identify options and trade-offs and push that into an actual strategic plan. If you look across the bottom part of the page, I've tried to annotate just kind of where we are. The first three phases are completed. First 2 phases completed. 3rd phase is largely completed and being socialized as I describe it now, and we're moving into that 4th column. Without questions, I'll move on to the next page. So on this page, what we've identified is the major, on the left-hand side of the chart, the major aspects of the data we've gathered, which was upfront research and analysis, stakeholder framing and interviews, the 3 of which of you all participated in, community, business, and what we're calling do-it-yourself workshops. Some details we'll have on the next chart with that, and questionnaires and other types of input received. The objective there was to get the viewpoints of the town and the community regarding town services, education, development, property values, et cetera. We've summarized that in, as we describe on the right-hand side of the page, a community outreach report. There's a 2-page executive summary and a 9-page detail report that was provided in materials. The richest amount of information is in the 9-page detail report. The 2-page or 1.5-page one is a little bit summarized. I've even taken that to a more summarized level for the chart I have here. If you want to understand the details, the 9-page document really is the one to read. So moving on to page 5, this is a snapshot of where we got the feedback from. We had direct input from approximately 2,000 people. That was achieved through what we're calling HLA-completed workshops, which are the workshops that the consultants ran for us. We had survey results from the website, some written feedback and whatever, and then the right-hand side of the chart enumerates the long list of do-it-yourself community workshops that the Strategic Plan Committee, not the consultants, but the actual committee members, ran and facilitated all across the town. The reason why we did that was in the upfront work that we did in November and December, we didn't achieve the level of involvement from the community that we thought was the right level to have. So we decided to undertake an additional step and hold sessions helpfully structured with PTA members in all of the different districts around town. We did them in the senior center. We did them for community associations, religious organizations here in town, to really make sure we had a session pretty much in every part of town that we could, for every demographic that we could, from 8 years old up to 80 plus. And I think we very successfully achieved that. The parenthetical numbers are the actual number of individuals that participated in each one of the individual sessions. This information was used to generate the community outreach results document. That's the longer 9-page document I described, but then also, if we move to page 6, I've tried to summarize it so we could look at it on one chart. And I know I'm running through this quickly. If you have questions as I'm going through it, please stop me.
On page 5?
Sure.
As you go down the list on the right-hand column, after Stratfield Village Association, it says R. Norn Neighborhood Group?
That was a community group. I believe it was held in the beach area. It was 8 to 10 residents. They wanted to have their own workshop. It's, I believe, the name of either an individual or acronym for several people.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on to page 6, which is the table in the chart. The community outreach results, which was developed by the consultants that are working with us, created from the results of all the workshops, the survey results, the stakeholder interviews that were done upfront brainstorming on the part of the committee, resolved itself into 5 general categories of information with several subcategories. So each one of the left-hand side of the chart has the 5 categories: governance, financial stability, economic development, education, and community character and resiliency. That 5th category is kind of a catch-all for a number of different areas. The key components of each one of those topics is enumerated here under the bullet points, further described in the outreach summary written document that we provided. I'll let you take just a quick stare at that, see if you had specific questions. The real objective is to say, for these areas, what kind of strategies and activities should we undertake to incorporate it into the strategic plan in each one of these areas to address these key components?
In reading through the document, the detailed report, there are a number of kind of conclusions reached or statements made about that. Is there any data that supports who those came from, how many folks, that type of thing? It said things like this was mentioned at every one of our outlets. Let's not focus on every, but let's say it's mentioned.
I can tell you a handful of ones.
I'm looking for the data behind that. It was mentioned by 200 people, it was mentioned by 10 people, it was mentioned by only elected officials, it was mentioned by...
There's a number of different ways to kind of parse it. We haven't really tried to itemize and quantify specific number of times. However, in the sessions, one of the techniques was to allow people to identify the issues they were concerned about and then rank them. So we certainly have how many times in each session a topic came up and how many people voted as that was the most compelling, important issue. Because what we found in running the sessions, the way that we conducted them was we allowed kind of a round robin through the room, captured it on flip charts for people to identify the issues that they thought were the most important and the most critical for the town. Then we allowed the members that participated in that to vote. We gave them each, I forget if it was 3 votes or 5 votes, to vote against that. That way we were able to say, okay, this topic of affordability or the topic of taxes was voted on by 8 of the 16 people in there for the number of votes. So we have that type of quantitative measurement. We weren't trying to use the results of this to specifically quantify and forecast something, which is the reason why we wouldn't go through a real hard quantitative analysis of aspects of it. We certainly could tell you the number of times topics came up or that sort of thing. We didn't parse it into who might have said it in a confidential in-person interview versus how it might have been articulated during the course of a workshop or session like that. So, am I being responsive to your question, Mr. Tetra?
For the moment, I've got some follow-up on that, but
Yeah.
not at the moment. Go right
I
ahead.
want to follow up on, I'm not going to say I see where you're going, but there was a couple of things in here that I saw that obviously are dear to certain groups. And I think, well, what I'm thinking about is where do we pair that or evaluate that or stack that up against the actual strategic plan? Does that come at his level, or is that going to be included in the report and then we assess it? Like, what I see is quality of school facilities. I mean, what have we invested, $300 million over the past 15 years in our school system? I mean, I think we're doing pretty good.
But
If a couple of elementary schools are complaining because there's no air conditioning, I don't want to see that start to sway it and say, we need to dedicate another $300 million towards our educational facilities. I don't know where that gets entered. Does that come at the executive level, or does that come at the strategic plan committee where they assess it and say, we don't want to skew?
Yeah, sooner or later, I think it's got to come at both, but let's start with the parents at Mill Hill certainly last year would have said we have a real issue with quality of school facilities. Hopefully next year they won't, because they know we're addressing that. So it doesn't mean what they say, and because this has been done over a couple of year period, certainly there's a blighted landmarks in there. The two items are mentioned, the community theater and the Stratfield Market, both have been solved. So that's why I'm kind of looking at it. At some point, I think the next step is, and there are certain things in here that at some point you're trading things off. And I'm not going to pick on any of these, so it's not anything specific there, but if we polled high school kids and said, do you like homework and should we have less homework? The answer is going to be yes. You have to weigh that off against why you're in high school. You want to get into a good college. Well, yes. Well, at some point you got to do a certain amount of homework in order to get into a good school. Nobody has to like homework to do that. But at some point, those are the trade-offs, I think, that have to be measured in some of this. So I'm looking for that trade-off step at some point in terms of, Mr. Basin, I think to your point, how do we rank these and kind of how do we come up with a game plan on some of this?
Let me try and provide an example of how a session played out. At a session, and the question, you went around the room and the first person spoke, and what they said was, I'm concerned about my taxes. My taxes are going up and I'm concerned about that. We went all around the room again, a number of different comments up in the flip charts. The second comment that same person made was, I'm concerned about the education quality and how much we're going to continue to invest in education. I said, and we typically didn't do this in a session because I didn't want to get into a confrontational debate with people. I said, really, I have to stop and ask the question. You're concerned about your taxes, which means you're concerned about spending, but you're concerned about our ability and our willingness to invest in education. Help me square this. How do we get past this challenge? And the answer was, well, I've been here a long time. My parents were here. We've paid taxes for a long time. And we should get more from the businesses in town. So the answer, which came up in a bunch of different sessions, was concern about taxes, almost the most common one. Concerned about ability and willingness to fund education, because it's one of the key assets of the town, our education system and the reputation we have. So what do we need to do something better about that? And the answer is we need to leverage the assets we have to better achieve that. The assets we have, where we are, we're on the coast. Could we do something in the beach area to propel some commercial activity there? Do we need to manage the available inventory of commercial space to help developers identify thoughtful development that will allow the commercial base to support the needs of the residential tax base? So that's the sentiment that I'm kind of getting. Using the economic engine, that is something that we can leverage in the town and its key attributes to support the spending. We need to be mindful and thoughtful about our spending. Spending control, in my opinion, and I have 35 years of business experience dealing with companies in great health and difficult financial situation. Spending control is one of our town's key strategic issues. It's the closest in issue that we're facing. It has the biggest potential impact to taxes and affordability here, and it's the least in our control because of what's happening at the state level. So we need to be mindful of that from a strategic standpoint of managing our spending to make sure we can continue to do the kind of investments and the development that we need to keep the town safe, happy, and affordable. Safe, affordable, and attractive are the three dynamics that we use in our material. I can't offer you any more explanation better than that.
Couldn't agree more with what you just said.
So how about I finish this, and then I'll come back and spend as much time as your patience will allow to talk about this topic. So the next page, page 7, where are we? What are the paths? So we described on the left-hand side of the page the upfront analysis that we did, the community feedback, and the 6th bubble down there in the lower left-hand side is other alternatives. That's what I'm asking you gentlemen for, other thoughts and ideas. The next steps, immediate next steps, is look at potential strategic options, leverage what we're calling these subject matter expert panels on each one of these topical areas, and I'll describe that in a second, and then get additional community feedback on this and refine that into the ultimate strategy that we develop on the right-hand side of the page. In the last page, I give a little bit of thought and structure to the subject matter expert step that we're going to go through. We're going to try and do this in early August when we bring the consultant back into town and run a session with a handful of what we're calling subject matter experts on each one of the different topics. So if you look at the right-hand side of this chart, there are 7 subject matter expert panels that we're anticipating. One on governance, one on town vision, goals, and brandings. And underneath each one of these headers, I've given a little bit of description of the type of topics that came out of the community outreach document that we're talking about. Financial stability, 2nd one. 3rd one is economic development. 4th one is education. And the 5th one has 2 categories, town zoning design and infrastructure, and community programs and facilities. So one of the questions that came up at the Board of Finance was, well, what do you mean by subject matter expert? Who are you going to have include in that type of session? So for governance one, what we've talked about is leveraging our proximity to Fairfield University, getting someone that's familiar and experienced in the topic of governance to work with us. We actually were able to identify a professor who's just in the final stages of writing a book on this topic of towns and communities modifying their method of management and governance in a different state, but they are very familiar with the structure here in the state of Connecticut. So we're going to leverage someone like that with possibly the town attorney and members of the RTM to have a healthy discussion around where we are as a town and a community, or the things that we should be doing and thinking about changing. Strangely enough, this exact topic is coming up on a town up the coast. Clinton, Connecticut is going through the process now of evaluating and changing. I think they're actually past the point of evaluation and moving to implementation of modifying from an RTM structure to a town council and mayor, or I forget the exact description of it, type of structure. So they kind of made the decision and moved that idea forward because they thought it was needed to better manage their operational and their execution. Economic development, the types of people we want to have in there is certainly Mark Barnhart from an economic development standpoint. We've identified someone from the Connecticut Business and Industry Council who's familiar with things. Joe McGee, you might have heard his name. Trying to work out the ability for Joe to participate. A developer, TPZ department, and possibly TPZ commission representation. So we have a good, healthy discussion around those sorts of topics. And I can go through it. We've met several times with the Board of Ed, and we're having several members of the Board of Ed, along with hopefully Dr. Tracy, haven't finalized that yet, and someone from one of the universities on college admissions and what type of characteristics do they see in students that are successful in college, and what kind of training do those students need from their high school or high school completion types of work and other types of work here. And we think that would be a good, healthy debate as we look at what we're spending on education, how do we need to modify the programs, and bring in some insights that the Board of Education and members of the public school management team can leverage as part of they go about managing our investment in education. And happy to go through with any and all of just who, what, where, but I don't know what your kind of timing is.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, just a quick thing. I think you caught my ear with when you mentioned the education. From your level on addressing this, I would like to see, when it comes to colleges and universities, the method they're delivering curriculum has changed drastically over the past decade. Now you've got online, virtual, certain things like that. I'm not saying that might be appropriate for a local school system, but at your level, that might be something worthy of having these people think. People that are running our education system saying, hey, we're seeing this outside, in other.
To hear from the colleges what they see and what they anticipate students of the future need to be successful in work or society, and how do we need to be think about modifying and adapting our education process to help develop the skills so the students we're producing, the graduates we're producing, have the best opportunity to get into the best universities and succeed in the best manner possible.
Something similar like that.
Any other comments? Mr. Timniak?
John, when do you didn't put a date, when do you think the committee will be wrapped up? When do you think you'll be done with your work?
We were hoping to be done by now.
Yeah.
However, the complexities of this project and the number of issues, and the town shuts down at certain points in time, and it's a challenge to get things done, and the three of you are very familiar with the topic of, the budget process kind of slows things and changes, and then, the holiday sessions, and then this June is graduations, people aren't available, whatever. We'd like to be done by the end of the year, mid-fall, if possible. That's what we're going to work towards.
See, in looking at that, I think what you've done is everybody's participated, in essence, in building the car, if you will, along the assembly line and getting this all out. And again, I think you've done a great job in terms of engaging the community. But I think we also, in this step, now that all this is pulled together, need to get back out to the community and let them see the car.
Well, actually,
the point that
we
you
certainly
made-
have this information, all this information. We've had it on our web page. We have it as part of these materials. It's been in front of the Board of Finance. All the people that participated in our sessions, we gathered their email address and we circulated this material to them as well.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking for is, again, some series of public hearings, again, getting back out to folks so they can hear this, see this, and have a chance to comment back as part of that. And I think we found that just online is perhaps not the most effective vehicle for getting feedback as we go through this. But I think that, and especially now, to say, look, you guys have all said this, here's how we've summarized it, here's how we've prioritized what you said, here's how we, laid this out, let's get back and say, just understand, this is what you said, and this is what we're hearing, and here's how it looks.
Yeah, that community feedback loop is a very important step. On page 7, we have identified that. We haven't finalized the exact methods. We've seen the town utilize some other methods electronically for that. Public hearings where someone will come in and present things is certainly part of that communication pattern that we're anticipating.
Well, I think those public hearings are very important. I think the online piece just isn't effective for everybody, both in understanding and also taking time to articulate their concerns. I think that having a series of public hearings is a very important, as much as it was on the engagement side.
Right. I could tell a funny story, and basically anything that you do is not the best method according to some people in the community, because we tried to communicate this by having public notices, articles in the newspaper, notices in the newspaper, letters to the editor, emails, social media, and people still came back and said, I never heard about your initiative.
No question that's an ongoing issue, and I think you and I talked a couple of different times about communicating with the town, and frankly, with 60,000 people, there will always be somebody who doesn't think what you did was the best idea.
So here's the metric. We physically, face-to-face interacted, or through an online survey, with over 2,000 souls, individuals. Each one of those individuals were representing the interests of some number of other people, their spouses, their children, their parents, whatever. If you use a regular, it's described in the materials, kind of what they call a social media influencer effect. That 2,000 physical people we interacted with really represents, you could say it's a 10-to-1 effect. You have 20,000 people, and to achieve a 20,000 people touch in a 60,000 person town where 10,000 of the people are the children at school, that's a pretty significant dynamic.
I think you did exceptional in terms of engaging the community and getting feedback. Now I'm looking at how do we get them to see the car? They've all put their piece on the car. They've put the wheels on, they put the steering wheel on, they put the radio in. When do they get to see the car?
We'll be as thorough and diligent on that as every other step we've undertaken in this process. Please rest assured of that.
Okay.
So before I close, the three of your input on key initiatives, major strategies, or big ideas, I welcome, I really look for, because you individuals see so much more of the town and hear so much more of the town than I might hear through the course of
What were
my
those again,
interaction.
John?
Key initiatives that we should be thinking about as part of a strategy, major strategies, or big ideas, some big ideas. We have, had some big ideas. We should do this at the beach, or we should do this in this area of town.
Okay.
Right? Always available for questions or emails or whatever.
John, I want to thank you and all the members on the committee. Over 2,000 touches, hundreds of hours, man hours, probably thousands at this point. This has been almost 3 years, right?
Two.
Two. Since we appointed you? We do 1 year? Yeah, 2 full years. It's been 2 full years.
Of absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
pleasure.
really impressive to see a document this thorough come together. I appreciate it.
Thank you. On behalf of the committee, thank you as well.
John, thank you very much. Let's see, next up. Item 9 has been pulled from the agenda at this point. We will come back to that at a future meeting. Item 10, from the First Selectman to hear, consider, and approve a charge for the Compensation Recommendation Committee for the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Bateson, I think you were, may I have a motion to put that before us?
I'll make a motion.
A second.
Second.
And Mr. Bateson, I think you had
Yeah, no, this is,
a project of writing that up?
Yeah, the only thought being that, I think that this is something that the Board of Selectmen should actually, document every 4 years that they're undertaking the process. The only thing I'm seeing that we had put in here August 30th as the deadline, it looks like, I just reread it, that the members of this committee are going to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen. Our next meeting isn't going to be until August 7th. So if you think 3 weeks is not enough time, maybe we can give them until September 30th, or if you guys are willing to, if we get these names from the Board of Finance and the RTM, we can just do a conference call, knock out a meeting super quick, and just appoint these people.
I think the special meeting idea makes the most sense.
That's fine. So I'm open to that. I envision like literally a 3-minute phone call, and we can appoint the people and get it over with.
Certainly with appropriate public notice, and anybody can listen on that call if they want to, but yes.
Okay,
I agree.
I'm good with that. So we'll leave the date in August, and we'll just get the people as soon as we can.
Yes.
I'm good then.
Good with that.
All right, any other comments on the recommendation as written?
I don't have any. I think it looks good.
All right, any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board, ready to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. If it's okay with the board, following up on this action, I'll get out to the chair of the Board of Finance and moderator of the RTM and request 2 volunteers each, meeting the requirements of this charge.
Fine with me.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next item. From the tax collector, to consider and act upon tax refunds as recommended by the tax collector in the amount recommended. May I have a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion.
A second.
Second.
I have an amendment.
Okay, please.
I'd like to make an amendment to remove the period at the end of the sentence and add a comma followed by the amount of $22,944.69.
May I have a motion? That's the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the amendment is before us. Any comments on the amendment? Okay, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The item as amended is before us. Any further comments on the item? All in favor of the item as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. Next up, from the town attorney, a private executive session on the Meadows Street lease. May I have a motion to go into private executive session?
I'll make a motion.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we have the town attorney joining us, and Mr. Papa George from the Board of Ed, I believe.
Mr. First Selectman, might I also suggest that you include a second private executive session with that so that I can leave it, Mr. Lottie can come back in. He has
Yeah.
Unless you want to go back out and vote.
No, that makes
Leave it
sense.
open to the board?
I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm fine with that.
So may we have a motion to go into private session to take items 12 and 13 in one session, including Attorney Lottie in with this?
I will make that motion.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we're now moving into private executive session. If we could ask anybody not identified. All right, thank you. May I have a motion to come back into public session?
I will make that motion.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're back in public session. In private session, no motions were made and no votes were taken. Any further discussion from the board at this time?
Yeah, I'd like to accept Attorney Lottie's recommendation.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, any further discussion?
No.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. And I think that takes care of both executive sessions. Next up, item 14, to hear, consider, and act upon any other business that shall properly come before this meeting. Any items, gentlemen?
I'd just like to thank everybody who helped put on the fireworks show. The events over the weekend were fantastic with the burning of Fairfield. The amount of people who were here at the Green, too, was just fantastic to see. I love seeing that. I have a feeling the community comes together. You have lots of neighbors out, lots of kids running around, lots of smiles on everybody's face. You tie in the history, especially something so impactful to this town as the burning of Fairfield. It was really, really cool to see. So thank you to all involved in that.
All right, thank you. And I concur entirely. Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, no, and also too, as it relates to the storm, I just want to thank, UI, Police Department, Public Works, and Fire. I mean, Old Post Road down here was a mess after that storm, and everyone did a great job cleaning it up.
Yeah, if you weren't down here, I don't think you saw the intensity. I think we lost 5 or 6 telephone poles, not trees, telephone poles that went down. It wiped out power here. We're still dealing with it as of today, which is over a week later. It was, and I want to thank Public Works, Police, and Fire for their efforts throughout the entire town, but specifically down around here to keep traffic flowing and get the town back up and operating as quickly as we can. With that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.